Hey, in this video, we're going to talk about the aerobic activity guidelines. How much aerobic activity should you get? We'll look at the evidence for these guidelines through the lens of the FITT principle, looking at frequency, intensity, time, and type of exercise. Now, to refresh your memories, the activity guidelines, which are based on evidence, indicate that we should strive to get about 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity or vigorous intensity aerobic activity each week. And that can come in a variety of ways, from cycling, swimming, running, walking, rowing, all sorts. Whatever you like probably works. We should also accompany that with about 2 days a week, at least 2 days a week, of muscle strengthening exercise. This video is going to focus on the aerobic activity, and we'll use another one to look at muscle strengthening. Now, let's remind ourselves what the FITT principle is. Whenever you want to elicit adaptation in the body, you need to tip the balance between supply and demand. Your body is, if you're in homeostasis, if you've been doing the same amount of activity for a while, your body has this supply and demand balanced, where your body has built enough mitochondria, enough blood, all sorts of things to meet the demand you place on it. Now, what exercise does is it tips that balance so that you're demanding the body to do more than it's used to. And so it's demanding the body to do more than the supply is designed for. And that causes you to adapt. If you go the opposite way and you demand less, then the balance would tip in this direction, where you have more supply than you need, and to restore balance, your body actually decreases the supply. So if you stop using your muscles, now you have more muscle than you need, and you atrophy and lose that muscle. So the FITT principle can go both ways to benefit you, or I guess it could be an overload or an underload of the system. Now we have the different ways to overload the system. It can be the frequency. If you want to get faster, you can try running more frequently. If you want to get faster or do the more aerobic exercise and get the benefits of it, you can increase the intensity. You can also increase the time, how long you do the aerobic exercise, and the type of aerobic exercise. That might be going from rowing to cycling or other things. So we'll look at the aerobic guidelines through these things, through frequency, intensity, time, and type, and what evidence there is for each of the parts of the guideline. So over in this corner here, I have the FITT principle, just to remind you about what we're focusing on. And let's start off with time. That's the one that's the most clear in the recommendation. They say to go for 150 to 300 minutes. Generally, we simplify that down to just saying 150 minutes or more of moderate intensity activity. But where does this come from? It's not just a random arbitrary number. It's based on evidence. Sometimes random arbitrary numbers kind of take the world by storm, kind of like the 10,000 step guideline. That is not based off of science. The story for that is a pedometer company or something like that was looking for a way to promote physical activity, or it might have been something in Japan, I don't remember exactly, but they were looking for a way to promote physical activity, and they just needed to get people to care about steps. And like, well, how many steps would be good? And they said, well, how about 10,000? It's a nice number, and it stuck. Now, striving to get 10,000 steps is a great thing, okay? It's definitely going to be accompanied with health benefits, but it's not, that recommendation is not based on science. You actually can maximize the benefits of step count, hitting somewhere around 6,000 to 8,000 steps per day. So what is the evidence for the 150 minutes per day? Now, this is coming from thousands of studies that are now summarized in what we call meta-analyses, which take all the data from these huge studies, combine it, and try and draw a consensus. And this graph is an excellent one that illustrates the rationale for the 150 minutes. This is actually coming from the scientific report from the scientists that gathered together to make the guidelines. They considered all the evidence they could, like dozens of top scientists, considering all the evidence and debating what the recommendations should be. And so they overlaid two graphs that I think show the rationale for the guidelines very well. Let's first look at this axis over here, so the relative risk of all-cause mortality, and then it's related to minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week. So the way they do this is the risk, they express it all relative to no activity. So in this, a person that does 0 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise a week, they have a relative risk of 1. And now people that get about 50 minutes or less, somewhere around 50 minutes per week, have about a 20% reduction in risk of mortality, risk of death over like the next 10 years. And then if you increase that even more beyond 50 minutes, if you go up to like 150 minutes, you see that there's even more reduction in risk. And then if you go up to about 300 minutes, you see that the risk is a little bit better, but beyond that, you really see no increased benefit. So in terms of what's the optimal dose in terms for mortality, we see maximum effective dose somewhere around 150 to 300 minutes. If you go up to 400 minutes, 1,000 minutes in this area, it doesn't seem to change your risk of mortality all that much. So you can get all the bang for your buck in terms of mortality with that 150 to 300 minutes. Now, the next thing I want to show you on this is the percentage of adults who get these amounts of physical activity. So over here, this bar graph is indicating that about 32% of adults do no exercise whatsoever, no moderate to vigorous physical activity. And then another 20% get about 50 minutes or less. So you can see that the amount of physical activity that people get goes down. So if we were trying to make a recommendation that everyone should do 1,000 minutes of physical activity, very few people are going to do it. And then if you look up here, there's no apparent benefit to doing 1,000 minutes versus 150 minutes. There's a saturation effect there. Now, if you're training for other things besides health, perhaps that 1,000 minutes, that increased amount of time will help with performance. But in terms of health, no, it doesn't seem to be all that effective. Now let's talk about how you get the physical activity. Now the recommendations generally say to get 30 minutes of physical activity about 5 days a week. Okay, so let's say 30 minutes a day. In previous iterations of the physical activity guidelines, it was indicated that you have to do exercises in about 10-minute bouts. That if you did any bout of exercise that was less than 10 minutes, it didn't count towards that total of 30 minutes per day. And this was because there was not evidence to say yes or no whether 1 to 5 minutes of exercise, whether that would actually have any kind of measurable impact on health. And so they made this just rough call saying about 10 minutes of activity, anything below that doesn't count. Now that changed in about 2018 because evidence indicated that these small bouts of exercise really do have a good impact on your health. So it doesn't matter if you're getting that 30 minutes of exercise all at once, so you do one bout of 30 minutes, or if you do like 6 bouts of 5 minutes, it's all the evidence indicates that you should get the health benefits that you desire. It might even be possible that if you did 15 bouts of 2 minutes of exercise throughout the day, so you just go for like a brisk walk every hour or so, the evidence indicates that that will have a measurable impact on your health. So you can get the exercise throughout the day or all at once if you wanted, What's important here is that this is consistent with the messaging that we often hear about adding in little activities like parking further away from the store or taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Uh, Under this old guideline that it had to be at least 10 minutes, that didn't make any sense. But now the evidence strongly supports that and indicates that if these small changes in lifestyle, by walking a little bit more, taking the stairs, they really do have a measurable impact on your health, and they should count towards the exercises that you're trying to do. So now let's talk about frequency in the FITT principle. Uh, do How many days a week do we do the exercise? Do we do it on the 5 days a week? Do we do it on 2 days a week? Generally, the recommendations are to get exercise on most days of the week, especially the aerobic exercise. And the evidence for that is pretty strong that it has benefits. Uh, so when we look at evidence for the benefits of aerobic activity, most of that is based off of people getting that exercise throughout the week. And some of the good things that happen from that is that you not only are you getting the chronic benefits like the adaptations, but you also get acute benefits. Every time you exercise, after the exercise, your blood pressure goes down, blood glucose is improved, insulin sensitivity, all these things are acutely improved. And you get those every time you exercise. Now, one of the big issues with exercise is time. And a lot of us don't have the time or don't make the time to exercise during the week, and we try to get it all in on the weekend. We kind of refer to these people as weekend warriors. Does it count if you get all the exercise on the weekend? And when I say does it count, does it benefit your health? And the answer is yes. Evidence is supporting that more and more, that it does help, definitely helps your health. But you do miss out on some of the acute benefits, right? So if you only exercise 2 days a week, if you get that 150 minutes of moderate activity on Saturday and Sunday instead of all throughout the week, by doing like a 75-minute run on each day, you're missing out on the acute benefits of like the blood pressure drop and the blood glucose improvements uh, during the week. I kind of think of this as you're missing out on brushing your teeth during the week. Yeah, you could brush your teeth a whole bunch on the weekend, but you miss out on all the stuff that you would get from brushing your teeth during the week. And the other thing that happens with this weekend warrior setup is that we tend to have a little bit more sedentary time, which can have some negative impacts. But really cool studies coming out recently, and you can click on the links for Dos Santos in 2022, and several other papers have indicated this, that those who accumulate the 150 minutes of physical activity, like on the weekend or across 2 days, they have the same health benefits as the people that get that 150 minutes throughout the week in smaller increments. So the evidence at least is saying that it's not that inferior. I used to think, especially, that if you only got it on the weekend, that you would see marginal benefits. But that doesn't seem to be the case. You see still pretty big benefits from exercising in this weekend warrior format. We need more data and more studies to conclude whether or not it's equivalent to the exercise during the week, but it's definitely not that inferior. And even more importantly, that weekend warrior format is way, way better than just being inactive if you don't exercise at all. So frequency, most recommendations say to get it throughout the week, but you do see some benefits a lot of benefit if you just get it on the weekend. Now, coming to intensity, let's look at the intensity recommendations in the activity guidelines. And most of the time, they just talk about 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity. But if you look closely at the bottom, they always have an asterisk and say that if you're doing more vigorous activity, like running, getting at least 75 minutes a week. Notice that's about half. And this is evidence-based, and I'll show you some evidence for this. But the evidence indicates that if you're at a higher intensity of activity, something that's much harder for you, you see the same reduction in mortality and same health benefits by doing half as much time. And this is a big deal because when we ask people what's the main thing that limits them from doing exercise, it's usually time. And so if we can get people to do more vigorous activity, they can get health benefits in a shorter amount of time. And the important thing on this also, as I'll show you, is that this increase in time or the decrease in time with intensity that you see, evidence is indicating that it's probably not just equivalent, but higher intensity exercise seems to elicit even better adaptations than moderate intensity exercise. And that's because exercise intensity strongly influences the conditions in the muscle and the blood and the brain all over the place. And if we looked at what's going on in the muscle during a light or a moderate walk and compared to that, like with the chemicals and the temperature and all sorts of things going on in the muscle during vigorous exercise, they're very different. And they're kind of like different medications, related, but certainly different doses. So let's just remind ourselves what the ACSM's activity or exercise intensities are. These are, when they talk about vigorous activity, it's not going to be all that vigorous for you guys, but it's vigorous for the general population. So moderate intensity activity is about 3 to 6 METs, which is about 3 to 6 times your resting metabolic rate. And this would include things like walking, or heavy cleaning, maybe some shooting hoops with your friends or volleyball, getting out and moving. And then vigorous activity would be like briskly walking, jogging, running, shoveling, competitive sports. The problem with this is one person's vigorous exercise is another person's moderate, right? For me, if I go and run like a 7-minute mile, that's going to be pretty hard for me. But if a person on the BYU cross country team goes and runs a 7-minute mile, that's going to be very moderate or even light for them. It's not going to push their homeostasis, push them out of homeostasis very much and not elicit many adaptations. Whereas for me, it's pushing me way out of homeostasis and I'll have a lot of adaptation. So this is a weakness on the ACSM or on the recommendations for physical activity intensity. And I'll show you some ways throughout the semester on how to personalize intensity a little bit better to get more predictable or adaptations. So we did a study a couple of years ago with one of my graduate students. Her name was Jessica. We had people come in and do cycling training on a cycloergometer. They came in 3 days a week for 8 weeks, and we had them do one of two protocols. One group did what we call moderate intensity continuous training, where they got on the bike and then cycled at the same power output or speed, essentially. If the bike had wheels, they'd be going the same speed. They cycled at the same speed the whole time. The intensity of this was pretty good. They're going at about 80% to 85% of their maximum heart rate. So this is really like an exercise you would do if you're going out for a good ride. Like not just like a moseying around and being lazy. This is real exercise. Now we had another group of people who had the same fitness level to begin with. They came in and did a different type of exercise, still cycloergometer. And in this exercise, they started off with a low intensity warm up, really light. And then we had them go at a really high intensity for 4 minutes. And then they go back down to a low intensity and then undulate up and down, alternating between high intensity and low intensity exercise every 4 minutes. This pushes homeostasis in different ways. When you're getting up to these higher intensity exercises, you can see I'll now trace the VO2, which is the black dots here. The VO2 is getting really close to VO2 max, which is really going to tip your balance and cause adaptation. Whereas here the VO2 is only getting up to like 60 to 70% of VO2 max, which will elicit adaptation, as you'll see, but just probably not as much as this other format. Now, a really cool thing with this design and the study is that we matched the total work that the people did. So if you take the area in these boxes, they're the same. They burn the same amount of calories in the work. If these bikes had wheels, they would have gone the same distance, right? So the difference here is that this group is just going the same speed, a moderate speed the whole time. And then the HIT group is going slow and then fast and slow and fast speeds. By the end of 40 minutes, they would end up in the exact same place. So they do the same volume of work, same amount of time of work, but the question is, do they get the same adaptation? And the answer is no. And we're not the only people to show this. This has been seen many, many times. So here is the time to task failure. We had everyone go at 80% of their VO2 max power. So let's just say 200 watts. So we had the subjects cycle at 200 watts for as long as they could before training and then after the 8 weeks of training. And before training, they could go about this long. After training, that mixed group could now go about 400 seconds and the HIT group could go about 475 seconds. Everyone got better, right? Everyone did. Exercise is amazing. Even if you don't have the perfect prescription, chances are the client is going to benefit, especially if they're untrained. You have to be a little more precise when you're working with highly trained athletes and trying to get really like optimal performance. But if you're just taking someone from being sedentary to now exercising them, almost anything's going to work. So looking at the percent change in their endurance, the moderate intensity continuous training, which is probably how most people do their exercise. This would be the equivalent of like when you say I'm going to go out for a run. That's probably what this is. So they increased their endurance by about 100%, whereas the HIT group increased their endurance by about 160%, even more. So they did the same amount of work, but one got more benefit. And we also see this in VO2 max. I didn't show the VO2 max data for Jessica's study, but things like VO2 max and critical power went up way more in the high intensity interval training group than the moderate intensity group. So intensity is super important. And here's a study where they actually applied this into a pretty big population of older Norwegians. So they got 800 as like 65-year-old Norwegians and followed them for 5 years. They first measured their VO2 max at baseline and then split them into 3 groups. One group was the control group, and they were told just go and do whatever you want, and we'll check in with you every couple of years. The other 2 groups, one was that mixed group, and they're doing essentially the same moderate intensity continuous training we were doing, except they had their patients doing it on a treadmill, and they only did it 2 days a week instead of 3 days a week. And then they had the HIT group, and they used the same high intensity interval training protocol that we use. In fact, we based it off of their group. So that's 4 minutes at high intensity and then recovering for 3 to 4 minutes at a lower intensity. And then they followed them for 5 years. And so you can see the VO2 max went up more in the HIT group than it did in the mixed group, the moderate intensity group. Kind of a funny thing on this is that the control group actually saw an increase in VO2 max. Sometimes that happens. Just being involved in a study, people get a little bit more excited about exercise. So the control group, they started to exercise a little bit more. And there was, but it didn't go up as much as the HIT group. And then you can see that the VO2 max benefit persisted for 5 years, right? So they kept a higher VO2 max for several years. And that's going to translate into increased independence and better function throughout life. Now, what's super cool about this study is they actually looked at mortality. They were using old people, and so naturally people die during the process. When you follow old people for 5 years, 6% of the subjects in the moderate intensity group died by the end of 5 years, whereas only 3% of the high intensity group died. Right? So there's a noticeable reduction in mortality over 5 years by just these people doing high intensity exercise versus a moderate intensity exercise. So intensity does matter. And that's something that doesn't come out in the recommendations very well. Perhaps in the next iteration when we have a little more evidence on this. But right now the data are pointing towards higher intensity exercise gives you even more benefits than an equal amount of lower intensity exercise. So if you can push yourself, do it. If your jog isn't stretching you, if you're just doing easy jogs every day, try adding on a little more speed a couple of days a week. You don't have to have every workout be exhausting, but add in some more intensity and you will see more adaptation. Now, what about the type of exercise? This is one that people worry about a little bit too much. The exercise guidelines break down exercise into two general areas. You got your aerobic exercise and your muscle strengthening exercise. And they'll elicit some of the same adaptations. Like if you go to the gym and lift weights versus go and run, it will benefit your vascular system, both of them, more by aerobic activity. The strengthening exercise is going to increase muscle mass and muscle strength much more than aerobic exercise will. So there's some overlap, but they also have different adaptations. Now, when you're looking within aerobic exercise, or what we usually will call cardio, it doesn't matter too much if you're cycling, swimming, rowing, running, hiking. If your heart rate's getting up, it's probably an excellent type of exercise. Now, one caveat on this is that a lot of times people will describe in pop culture, pop science, social media, at the gym, they'll describe high intensity interval training as things like doing a bunch of burpees and then going and doing a bunch of bench press, a squat, and cleans, like circuit training. And while that's good for you, it's not the HIIT training that I just talked about. The HIIT training I talked about in the previous slide, that's aerobic exercise. Now, when you're doing your circuit training where like you're doing your burpees and all these things, yes, it's bringing your heart rate up, but the strain on the vascular system is quite a bit different than it is when you're cycling or running. Just to kind of point out the differences, when you're doing a moderate or vigorous intensity aerobic activity, your blood pressure, systolic blood pressure is probably going from 120 up to maybe 170 if you're really intense exercise. Now, if you're deadlifting, your systolic blood pressure is going from 120 up to 300 to 400 during that deadlift. Major differences in how that's going to stimulate the heart and the arteries. You can get cardiovascular benefits from strength exercise and circuit training, but it's not as clean cut as an aerobic exercise. So when we're talking about aerobic exercise, running, cycling, walking, hiking, swimming, rowing, anything that's going to be a repetitive movement over a prolonged period of time. And if you're doing that, what really makes the difference here, like what's the best exercise? Is cycling better than running? Is walking better than cycling? Is rowing the best? Right? You often hear these people say this is the best exercise you can do. And the difference between exercises is probably negligible. There might be some that are better than others, but the most important thing is really the exercise that you'll do. So let's say that rowing is better at eliciting an increase in VO2 max, but you absolutely hate rowing and won't do it. Now rowing is not the best exercise, right? Or we talked about how high intensity interval training, aerobic training, elicits greater increases in VO2 max and fitness. But if you absolutely hate it and won't do it, it's not that great, right? So the type of exercise that's the best is the one that you'll do. And keep that in mind when you're prescribing exercise for yourself and for others.